ways between sites distributed to the planning approach, but situated in a different
Can I
landscape.
do something on me? Oh, perfect. So it's working on YouTube. That's good.
Well, for me, it's a personal journey in a way. I started as a 20-year-old at the local riverside excavating my first baskets. I'm there, the one at the bottom and the one in the little red point, the one with the red jacket. I also started my experiments then making fish hooks and baskets from cedar. So that was my first, my first time I really got involved in archaeology, and it was in the mud. Then in Groningen, I studied in Groningen as a student assistant for the Neolithic for a gigantic project about fishing gear, which unfortunately was never published, but it was really interesting and also involved in a lot of wetland science. And then, of course, in all the big projects, many of you were involved in as well.
But they're done lined up now. If you click on that one, but I can hide that one for now if it's confusing.
These collaborations really basically forms the basis of our team because, quite a number of you, of team members, I knew already for decades. So this is the crowd. I think we had a wonderful team, and I'm extremely grateful for all the fun we had, interesting discussions. Well, we had it last night, we had a lot of fun to finish it. So, different people, different academics, craftspeople, archaeological companies, museums, and Masamuda, of course. So what did we use? We used quite a bit of archaeological science methods and experimental archaeology. User analysis, you will hear more about it, what kind of objects did they make and use, and also GCMS and SEM analysis of pottery and studying the residue in pottery. So again, that's also part of a paper you will hear about. Well, what is our approach? For us, experimental archaeology was essential in this project. To understand how objects work, how materials reacted, and to better understand in the end archaeological artifacts. And we wanted to connect experimental archaeology in a fantastic way to connect people from all different backgrounds, academics, craftspeople, the public. Everybody kind of has input, and we noticed that a lot also in Masamuda. We combine traditional research methods, but also laboratory-based archaeological science analysis. Close collaborations also with experienced craftspeople. So we test our preconceived ideas and get new ideas. Last, something that Calvin Wilson will talk about from a different perspective to me, and I think to many of our team, the visualizations that were made by him are not only a nice illustration, but also were a research tool, because the discussions to fill out all the little details by everybody's experience, I think we all experience as a really, really vital and really important way for the team as a whole to put input into these visualizations like the one on the dugout. Well, and ultimately, of course, to better understand how people lived on these water-rich fringes of the Neolithic world. So, here are some of the websites. The one on Putin Live will stop at the end of the year, but the others, start one, I think, will continue for quite some time. And then, of course, a big thank you to all the students who were involved, all the Masamuda volunteers who participated in these experiments, all the people in the museums and archaeological depots who allowed us to study the collections, and to all the colleagues at the Laboratory of Cultural Studies, and of course the entire putting up team. And I want to say a very, very special thank you to my partners in crime for a long time, since 2012, when we first started to build the Horst de Holt House, and that's Leo Wolterbeek, Diederik Pomstra, Annelou Verbaas, and Erik Mulder. So thank you, and as I said, Jeroen is not here, unfortunately, so he will address and talk about Masamuda in a little film. Are you ready for that?
In 1985, some members of the local archaeological association put their heads together. Excavations yielded many new insights and even led to the discovery of the Vlaardingen culture. But for the general public, the image was mainly one of shirt, bones, pieces of flint and buckets. An initial plan for an archaeological park was put on paper. The aim was to capture the enthusiasm of the general public by means of one-to-one reconstructions of houses from prehistoric times, the Roman period and the Middle Ages found in the Meuse Delta region. It took a while, but from 2006 onwards the concept slowly took shape. At the outset, the basic principle was that the archaeological heritage site should offer visitors a journey through time, taking them along successive archaeological periods. The first house to be built, top right, was, of course, from the Vlaardingen culture, where tens of thousands of children and adults have
while waiting for that to get going, quickly, we'll check the beacon for the ball behind the scenes of the that will not one of the pictures we get
Because we had a problem with the sound, all the films will be shown later, and I would like to ask you to come forward. You can use the microphone. I want to introduce you to, there's a big team of specialists working on this project, and one group of specialists looked into the food items. So, if you are all very quiet, you can hear Jeroen first.
Utensils are carried out by volunteers as much as possible. Donations, sponsorship and income from group tours ensure healthy operations. In order to maintain the highest possible quality, in 1985 some members of the local archaeological association put their heads together. Excavations yielded many new insights and even led to the discovery of the Vlaardingen culture. But for the general public, the image was mainly one of shirt, bones, pieces of flint and buckets.
But it's okay, but
An initial plan for an archaeological park was put on paper. The aim was to capture the enthusiasm
It's still
of the
streaming?
general public by means
Yeah.
of one-to-one reconstructions, houses from prehistoric times, the Roman period and the Middle Ages, found in the Meuse Delta region. It took a while, but from 2006 onwards, the concept slowly took shape. At the outset, the basic principle was that the archaeological heritage site should offer visitors a journey through time, taking them along successive archaeological periods. The first house to be built, top right, was, of course, from the fire enclosure, where tens of thousands of children and adults have since been able to learn about the coastal Neolithic. Since then, two buildings from the early medieval period
Is this
have
image not
also
being
been
shared online? Is
constructed
it just a
based
delay?
on excavated house plans in the center of Rotterdam and the city of Spijkenisse. The terrain is currently being remediated, after which the other reconstructions with their accompanying landscapes can also be realized.
Sound settings.
A modern reception building, including a classroom, will be integrated into the embankment. Our site is called Masamuda, the 9th century name for the Meuse Delta area, which is where we draw our inspiration from. There is a non-profit foundation. Making a profit is not the goal in itself. All income is reinvested in the park. Maintenance work and construction of buildings, landscapes, and utensils are carried out by volunteers as much as possible. Donations, sponsorship, and income from group tours ensure healthy operations. In order to maintain the highest possible quality, a few concessions as possible are made to modern methods and
They say that they can only
techniques.
hear us from the
This
back.
allows
I think it wasn't
volunteers
turned
to
on. Now it is.
increase their knowledge and skills, contribute to science, and share this with visitors. Since 2006, we have been working closely University of Technology and our institutes. The skills are acquired by attending courses given by specialists and workshops that in recent years have mainly been organized as part of the NWO project. Discovering and developing methods and techniques is also part of the volunteers' work. Naturally, these are used for the benefit of Masamuda, for the construction of houses or for the design or maintenance of the authentic landscapes. A good example of this is chopping trees with flint axes for the repair of the Vlaardingen Culture House. Watling and loaming a red oven based on the excavation data of the so-called Rotter House also fits into this practice. The reward is a well-functioning oven, which contributes to the insight into the functioning of such medieval houses. Volunteers' work within the NWO project was the construction of a Neolithic dugout. The aim was to produce a reliable reconstruction of contemporary examples using flint, bone, and wooden tools. Not only was every minute spent on each activity recorded, but the traces of use that were created were also documented so that they could be compared with real archaeological finds and research could be carried out into wear and tear and how the tools behaved. The final phase of the dugout experiment consists of sailing tests. These tests not only assessed whether the dugout is a functional means of transport, but also determined what impact it may have had on trade and maintaining contact between people.
I'm just gonna. Okay. That was this one.
During the late Neolithic, almost 5,000 years ago, the Rhine-Meuse delta of the Western Netherlands was inhabited by people who farmed, fished, hunted and gathered in these water-rich margins of the Neolithic world. Excavations have uncovered many of these people's remains, especially at the extensive 1960s investigations at the Dutch town of Vlaardingen, leading archaeologists to designate them as the Vlaardingen culture. pottery shapes, polished stone axes and flint arrowheads. In the Netherlands, dozens of sites attributed to this culture are currently known, along with thousands of artifacts. Archaeological research has taught us a great deal about these people, yet we still know relatively little about their everyday life. For this reason, a research program funded by the Netherlands Organisation for Scientific Research, NWO, began in 2021, putting life into late Neolithic houses. The research was done in close cooperation with the volunteers of the Educational Archaeological Centre of Masamuda in Vlaardingen.
Oh fuck, that's the one that we downloaded
In this program, more than 20 archaeologists, specialists and artists, along with volunteers, tried to answer key questions. What did these people eat? And how did they prepare their food? What kind of craft activities did they carry out? And what were the tools they used to shape their immediate surroundings? What was the role of organic materials like wood, hides and bone in their technological system? How did they move through the landscape? And what contacts did they have with other groups living further inland? To find answers, the latest scientific methods were combined with experimental archaeology, with researchers and volunteers working closely together. This film presents an overview of the results. The landscape of the wetlands of the Western Netherlands was shaped by the wide delta of the rivers Rhine and Meuse. Archaeological sites of the Vlaardingen culture are found on a variety of landscape settings, on coastal beach ridges, on natural river levees in the delta, on high river dunes, and even further inland in the river area. There is one thing all these settlements have in common. They are all located close to water. This project focused on 3 of these sites, 2 of which, Vlaardingen and Hekelingen 3, were located on the river levees, whereas the third, Den Haag-Steinhof, was situated on the coastal beach ridges. This landscape looked very different from today. Rivers, streams and creeks were free to move, and much of the Western Netherlands formed a vast wetland with scattered higher, drier areas. It was on these relatively safe spots that people built their houses. One of the best ways to understand how these wetland people built their houses is to build one yourself. That is exactly what was done at Masamuda in Vlaardingen. With the help of students and volunteers, using only tools and techniques available in the late Neolithic, a full-scale replica of a Vlaardingen structure was constructed in 2016. The design was based on a house plan excavated at Haamstede Brabers in 1959. It is this house that formed the focus of the project. We wanted to bring it to life by means of experiments and the results of scientific research on archaeological finds. When the project started in 2021, the house was 5 years old and was in need of maintenance. Several central posts needed to be replaced, providing an ideal opportunity to study how this was done in practice. This turned out to be surprisingly easy and considerably changed our ideas about the longevity of such houses. Unexpectedly, a severe storm also caused damage to the building, partially blowing it over. With a large group of volunteers and some creative problem solving, it became clear that with sufficient manpower, the house could be put upright again. An important role in the project was given to micro-wear analysis of the artifacts. This method is based on the fact that using a tool made of stone, bone, antler or wood leaves microscopic traces of wear on the used edge that are characteristic for specific activities.
Over here, that's the rounding that you see that frequently occurs from height scraping.
Although the actual objects made of organic materials like wood, horn or skin are rarely preserved, analysis of these wear traces can reveal the implements used to work such materials, indirectly pointing to past activities otherwise not visible in our archaeological record. By experimentally using replicas of Stone Age tools, the resulting wear traces could be compared to those on archaeological implements. Researchers thus gained valuable insights into how tools were used and what kind of craft activities were carried out in the past. For example, the analysis of bone awls showed that the people were making coiled baskets with different plant fibers. The analysis of the numerous flint scrapers with hide-working traces found at Den Haag Steinhof revealed that the inhabitants could be considered part-time specialists, producing an excess of hide-based products. These could be exchanged for flint axes with people living inland near flint sources in Dutch Limburg and Belgium. It also became clear that hide working was carried out with a variety of tools. They even used a wooden digging stick for scraping hides. Microware analysis also pointed to the technological connections between different categories of objects which are often studied in isolation. Here you see a flint knapper striking flakes from a broken flint axe, which had been hafted in an antler sleeve. He uses an antler hammer to make the flint drills, which are used to repair the broken pot, seen in this image. In the background, the plant fibers are hanging, which are used as bindings to tie the broken off shard back onto the vessel. The Vlaardingen house at the Masamuda Centre was quite empty for a while, as the archaeological data tell us very little about the interior of these structures. Sometimes we can identify the location of a hearth, but where people slept, sat, ate and stored their belongings remains largely unknown.
The other ones.
To explore these questions, researchers, prehistoric building specialists and local volunteers regularly came together to brainstorm on possible furniture and to carry out experiments. These included building a communal corner bed, splitting tree trunks for planks to make a chest to store tools, and considering practical issues such as how doors might have been opened and closed. Many reconstructions place the furniture along the walls, but in Masamuda we chose to construct a central feature adjacent to the hearth, where people could sit, store utensils, and hang food to dry or smoke. Together with vertically hung skins, this feature would reduce the living space, which would mean having to heat a smaller and therefore cozier portion of the house during the cold winter months. Food is a fundamental aspect of human life, and this was no different for the Vlaardingen people. 50 years of research at Vlaardingen sites have given us a general idea of their diet. Cattle bones show that cows were kept, probably for milk, meat and hides. The same applies to sheep and goats. Botanical research has demonstrated that grain was present at most sites, which could be processed to make bread or porridge. The many thousands of tiny fish bones found everywhere also show that people made extensive use of fishing in their wetland environment. The project Putting Life into Late Neolithic Houses went a step further. The researchers wanted to know not just the ingredients, but the actual dishes people ate. To do this, they applied two cutting-edge research methods, both focusing on cooking pods recovered from archaeological excavations. On some pottery shards, encrusted food residues were visible, traces of meals that had burned in the vessel and survived for thousands of years. By analysing these residues with an electron microscope, capable of magnifications of up to 1,000 times, specialists could identify what these charred meals consisted of.
So it is like looking inside people's cooking pots. And what is really amazing is that this crust, or food crust, if you wish, survives for thousands of years. In this particular case, for Heckengen's site, it is like 5,000 years.
In addition, the pottery was analysed for lipids, or fats. During cooking, fats get absorbed into the ceramic walls and can be preserved for long periods. By taking samples from the pottery and analysing them using specialised laboratory techniques, scientists in England were able to determine what kinds of fats had once been present.
Pots that we're analysing, the Vlaardingen culture pots, the majority of those have a very much a culinary use. So they've been used for preparing foods.
Together, these methods methods provided a wealth of information about Vlaardingen recipes and about differences between sites. For example, people living on river levees often ate freshwater fish, cooked whole and flavoured with wild chives, while those on coastal ridges more commonly consumed grain combined with milk and meat. That the Vlaardingen people did not live in isolation is clear from research into the origins of their stone tools. The flint used to make many of the tools cannot be found in the Western Netherlands, and must therefore have been brought in from elsewhere. Much of this flint was imported in the shape of polished flint axes, originating from flint sources in Dutch Limburg and Belgium. The absence of production waste suggests that these axes were brought to the wetlands as finished products. How did the Vlaardingen people in the west of the Netherlands maintain contact with communities in the south and east? And how did they move through the landscape? In the delta, water transport was by far the most efficient option, especially for moving goods. For this, they used dugout canoes. A dugout canoe is a relatively simple type of boat, made by felling a tree, shaping it, and hollowing it out. Two such canoes from the Vlaardingen period are known, one from Hazendonk and one from the Veeringermeer, both made of oak. One of the first experiments of the project, carried out by a group of enthusiastic Masamuda volunteers, was the construction of a similar vessel. A large oak trunk was placed on the site, and over a period of 6 months, volunteers working under specialist supervision produced a beautifully crafted dugout, using only Stone Age tools made of flint, bone, and antler. All activities were timed and documented, and use-wear traces on the tools were regularly recorded. This provided valuable insights into construction techniques, construction times, and repair methods. Finally, several paddling experiments were carried out. These showed that the dugout, which was a little over 5.5 meters long, could easily carry 4 people. The project, putting life into late Neolithic houses, has produced an enormous amount of new information about the daily lives of the Vlaardingen people. What they ate and how they prepared their food, what kind of craft activities they carried out, and what their houses looked like inside, where their materials came from, and how they moved through the landscape and maintained contact with communities living further inland. Understanding what people thought, felt, and believed is far more difficult. Archaeological sources always offer only a partial view of the past, yet one theme emerged repeatedly throughout the research: the importance of water. It was not only a source of food, the main transport route, and a major limitation on available land, but also a place where sacred spirits were believed to live, a realm of the supernatural. This inseparable bond with water in the Western Netherlands is something we can still understand and relate to today, thousands of years after the Vlaardingen people lived there.
No?
No, me neither. Do you
No.
mind if we just, what
Yeah.
we could do is we could just lie it on.
Okay, that's all right. Yes,
Then
sure.
you have to take this
Okay,
one
this
off
one off,
again.
but we'll leave that one
Yeah,
on.
then it's
So
tricky.
this stays? This stays? Okay.
Oh, this one's not working.
Okay, it's not working. Not working. This one is working. Good morning. Is it working? Is it working? Or is like this better, huh? Okay. Okay. Then I will hold it. Well, that's all right. No, good morning, everybody. I believe, well, that we all share the view that cooking lies at the heart of many households. Maybe not everyone, but in many households. And in a very particular way, culinary practices and food traditions also help in shaping cultural identity. And for the people of Vlaardingen, we have long had substantial knowledge indeed about the plants and animals they were used. Yet, until recently, we knew surprisingly little about how these foods components were actually transformed into daily meals. And now I need my first slide. What do I touch? Is the polychy somewhere? I don't see the polychy. I don't see. It's just space bar, okay. No, sorry. Caro? And it is precisely this gap that our project set out to address. And for that reason, understanding cooking practices, so actually and literally looking inside people's cooking pots, became one of the components of the research project whose completion we celebrate today. And the burning of food can be seen either as an unfortunate accident or from archaeological perspective, actually, it is a blessing. And when the food residues are preserved, they are usually, or most of the time, charred and firmly attached to either inner or outer surface of the potsherds. And such residues are generally considered to reflect the original contents of the vessels and to represent last or one of the last meals cooked in the pot. And just is to show who was actually cooking at the time and who ruled the world of northwestern Europe during the late Neolithic. Clearly, the Trechterbeker and Vlaardingen people, followed shortly afterwards by the corded-ware culture. And for this project, we selected 3 sites. They have been mentioned already in this beautiful film here. And they are pottery assemblages, of course. And these are shown in this paleogeographical map, highlighting the location in distinct environmental zones. So that would be from coastal dunes at Steinhof to the inland wetland levees at Vlaardingen and Heckelingen. And during the early years of the project, we held several pottery sampling sessions, as shown as these photos. Well, these are the results of our selection from each site. Well, we selected sherds from both food crust analysis and absorbed residue analysis. And today, however, I will focus on the food crust, as I would like to emphasize the daily cooking rather than the long-term use of the pots. But the study of food crust, however, is a complex matter and not single research method is sufficient. Therefore, different disciplines are usually combined, each with its sensitive methods. And for this project, we chose scanning electron microscopy and lipid residue analysis. And at this point, I would like to highlight that it is for the very first time in Dutch archaeology that large assemblages of food residues encrusted on pottery have been studied using this integrated approach. Well, in principle, SEM enables the identification of plant particles and certain animal remains that have survived the food preparation and cooking. And for this project, SEM analyses were carried out at the RCE SEM lab in Amsterdam. And this is in principle how the lipid residue lab looks in York. Well, in general, lipid residue analysis enables the differentiation of fats derived from ruminant, non-ruminant plant oils, aquatic resources, both marine and freshwater, and the identification of dairy products. Well, in this project, we also applied recently developed high-resolution mass spectrometry at the University of York to identify cereal-specific biomarkers. And there is a name of this biomarker, and I just dare to say this in the short, AR. Now I'm moving to the results. I have to have some water. I'm moving to our combined results, and I will start with Vlaardingen. Well, under the SEM, many food crusts from Vlaardingen reveal the presence of herbaceous stem fragments. Importantly, some of the crusts revealed diagnostic features of these herbaceous stems, specifically epidermal and vascular tissue, which indicated that indeed they belong to one of the allium species, as already mentioned in the film, most likely wild chives, leek, or white garlic. And the greens of white allium were likely used to flavor the fish that was cooked in Vlaardingen pots, as indicated by multiple fish scales embedded in food residues, often together with allium greens. Well, fish cooked with the addition of green plants, including allium, seems to have been a common dish prepared in Vlaardingen. In some residues, like this one, the herbaceous stems were clustered together, which you see very well, suggesting they made up a significant portion of the prepared food. But how do we know it was freshwater fish? Well, the presence of fish scales, just to start with, suggests that they must have entered the pots being still attached to the skin. Possibly the whole fish or chunks of fish were cooked. And because the scales are often fragmented, determination of fish species based just on SEM is difficult and impossible. But the one exception is the scale embedded in one of the residues, which was identified for us as most likely perch scale. Perca fluviatilis, what a beautiful name, huh? Well, but when we look into the lipid residues and results, the processing of fish oil is evident in nearly all the pots. Equally significant is the presence of both freshwater and anadromous fish. And this graph shows the range of values that likely reflect differences in the feeding behavior of the fish species present, where in particular, the more carbon isotope enriched values probably correspond to marine or anadromous species, for example, sturgeon, while the lower values are consistent with the freshwater species, like perch or pike. Well, interestingly, the same results suggest that sturgeon may have been cooked on its own without additional ingredients. Well, we have also observed that sturgeon appears to have been cooked in larger pots, while freshwater fish in smaller pots. Yet this correlation would ideally need to be established on a larger number of vessels. Within ruminant carcass fats from sheep, cattle, and possibly wild ruminants were also detected in a few vessels. However, there is no evidence for dairy products and no evidence or indication of cereal processing, neither SEM or in lipid residues. And I would just summarize this a bit for you, the cooking practices as Vlaardingen. So the fish dominated the cooking activities with biomarkers indicating both freshwater and likely anadromous fish, possibly including sturgeon. And freshwater fish were often cooked with green plants, including allium, perhaps as culinary staples, while sturgeon appears to have been prepared with no additional components. And a few vessels contain ruminant fats, but there is no evidence for dairy or cereal processing. Well, similar to Vlaardingen, many pots from Heckelingen revealed presence of fish scales indicating fish-based dishes. In some pots, fish was accompanied by green plants, also here including allium. Well, as further taxonomic determination of allium species is difficult, just based on the results or remains that we have, we can perhaps suggest a few species that might fit the environmental context of the sites. And this would indeed be a wild chives, leek, and white or crow garlic. where actually Annelou asked me earlier this week when this plant would typically be collected. Well, I would think the best time would be in spring, also through the summer, and sometimes even in winter if you are lucky, because then the fresh shoot starts just to show up. A particularly noteworthy addition to the food crust data is the presence of allium pollen at Heckelingen, identified within the occupation layer. But I believe Velmoed will tell us much more about this later on in her talk. Again, the overall lipid residue data on food crust confirms that processing fish was a major component of daily culinary practices at Heckelingen. As with Vlaardingen, the range of carbon isotope values again indicates that both freshwater and anadromous fish were present in these vessels. But there are also more differences. At Heckelingen, at least one pot was used to process dairy fats, and compared to Vlaardingen, there are more vessels with lipid evidence for processing ruminant fats. I wanted to show this same image if there is anyone in the audience who could perhaps confirm or not whether this might be the plates or the bone plates from sturgeon embedded in one of the residues from Heckelingen. And there is one more difference. There is one more difference in daily cooking practices compared to Vlaardingen, where in one of the vessels from Heckelingen, evidence of cereal cooking was observed in some images, and numerous grain particles actually were embedded in the residue matrix, revealing single-layered aileron, here likely indicating emmer wheat. And the aileron layer, which stores the grain's protein, often remains intact during the food preparation, cooking, and eventually charring. Where the lipid analysis on this food crust suggested that this cooking event was actually about the mixed dish of emmer grain and likely ruminant adipose component, which could be from any part of the body, the meat or the fat. And also here, just a quick sum up of about Heckelingen cooking practices, where we have evidence for processing of both freshwater and likely anadromous fish. A freshwater fish was also here often cooked with green plants, including allium, possibly also here in Heckelingen as a culinary staples. Unlike Vlaardingen, dairy fats and ruminant fat appears in numerous vessels, and at least one pot contains a mixed dish of emmer grain with likely ruminant component. Well, unlike Vlaardingen and Heckelingen, cooking at Steinhof focused primarily on processing cereals, including emmer and barley, often with the addition of dairy products like milk, where the grain may have been crushed before cooking into grist, which would likely have enhanced the cooking process by improving time, texture, and flavor released into the dishes. Well, significantly, mixed dishes were cooked at Steinhof. In one pot, emmer and barley were even cooked together with addition of ruminant adipose fat, either meat or fat. Well, in general, it appears that at Steinhof, mixed dishes were actually common, with a higher presence of dairy products, but also ruminant, like cattle, goat, or sheep, or deer, and non-ruminant, possibly wild pig, meat, as well as fish oil. But interestingly and significantly, I would say, the fish oil was only found in the absorbed lipid residues at Steinhof. Where at Steinhof, the identification of cereal-specific lipids actually added more pots with cereals to the total assemblage. and mainly indicating emmer, but also occasionally barley. As cereals were likely cooked either with milk into a porridge or gruel, or with animal meat and fed into stew-like dishes. Also for Steinhof, just to sum up, well, that mixed dishes were common at Steinhof, with emmer frequently cooked with milk, ruminant meat or non-ruminant meat or fat. And aquatic resources are also indicated, but only in absorbed residues. And now you will see them all three together as I'm moving on to some concluding thoughts. Where at the inner side level, comparison of vessel contents from Vlaardingen, Heckelingen, and Steinhof reveals both clear correlations and notable differences. In particular, strong similarities are evident between Vlaardingen and Heckelingen, but also undeniable differences. Whereas at Steinhof, daily cooking practices followed completely different pattern. One may wonder whether these differences in cooking patterns are linked to the location of the sites in various environmental settings, specifically wetland, levees versus coastal barriers and dunes, where these distinct ecological zones certainly provided different resources, not only in terms of plant and animal food, but also in terms of suitability of land for agriculture and animal husbandry. Well, coastal areas, specifically high salt marshes and low dunes, may have been more suitable for cereal cultivation and cattle grazing, while more inland located levees and riverbanks, which are typically of wetland environments, likely supported fishing and hunting, as well as herding of cattle and other domestic animals. Well, possibly not everyone may agree with what I'm just about to say now, but it seems to me unlikely that people moved between these levee sites and coastal sites in order to take up cereal cultivation or the other way around. Instead, we might be looking at more permanent sites where people were skilled or specialized, if you wish, either in cereal cultivation or animal herding or animal husbandry in the coastal areas dune, or more oriented in fishing, hunting, and possibly herding of domestic animals in wetlands. Well, it appears that each of these areas or individual sites played a distinct role within a broader network. At the same time, it is entirely plausible that a degree of mobility existed alongside contacts for the exchange of goods or seasonal gatherings. Well, taken together, all these elements, whether driven by resource availability, local culinary preferences, or site-specific activity, they all point to deeply embedded culinary traditions, which are reflected in the meals once prepared there in ceramic vessels. Thank you. Thank you, Annelou, for bringing us all together here today, and thank you all for listening. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Question about this slide. What you see is in Vlaardingen you don't have cereals. In Heckelingen you have something, yes. And in Den Haag you have a lot. And some slides ago I thought Vlaardingen is the oldest, after that Heckelingen, and after that Steinhof. Steinhof, was it Is it correctly that it's the youngest one?
Actually, I think Heckelingen is the youngest as we look at the dates that were provided for the site. I think Vlaardingen is older, but it has a really broad dating range. Then comes, oh, there we go.
I think they're quite broad dating ranges, so that it's not necessary. At Vlaardingen, I think it starts maybe a bit earlier, but it's not necessarily that all the samples are older. I think, because I think we mostly sampled for this stuff trench 17, which is I think actually the later phase, so it's quite contemporary. I think overall.
Wow. I thought maybe there's a relation between the age, the leeftijd, when it was, the period and the amount of cereals because of the introduction of the agriculture in Holland. But
we are actually past that stage,
okay.
the introduction of cereals. So it is some.
It's okay, I'll hold it.
Yeah, it is something else which has played a role here that we do not have them. Maybe not the chronological setup of the individual sites. But what struck me about this map that like in Vlaardingen, which is somewhere in the middle, we don't have any cereals, and suddenly down in Heckelingen, we do one pot.
For the people who are not familiar with these sites, it's maybe good to clarify that this is very much about what Lucy and colleagues have found in the pots, while cereals have actually were found at Vlaardingen and are present at Vlaardingen type site.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much. Indeed, archaeobotanical evidence, but I thought you will talk about this. I didn't want to, spill too much. So we do, and this is a kind of amazing thing that we do have cereals at Vlaardingen and Heckelingen. I don't say too much, but in archaeobotanical. So we have grains. So we were really struggling, we kind of thought, wow, what the heck, why do we don't have them in the pots? And I think the best explanation we can bring is perhaps they were cooked different way there, because they are there, but we don't have them in the pots. So it seemed like maybe they were not really a daily meals. So that's how we bring the message of the meat.
Bread
maybe they made, yes, a different way, maybe bread. But actually I went from some old residues, charcoal residues, with hope that I will find some bread particles. And this would be such an excellent addition. But I did not. No. So we don't know, but maybe bread, maybe.
One more question. Did you find any evidence of salt?
No.
Next question.
No.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah. Although, like in some sites, I have something to tell. Like when we had this Annelou protocol that we had, the seeds of Salicornia trod at the side. I said, what the heck, why? And then I thought maybe
You have to explain Salicornia.
Oh, Salicornia is the what is the Dutch name? We buy them nowadays. This green succulent, stems. You cook fish with them actually. Silicra. Yeah, sacra. Thank you. Yes. So so then for Cordenware, we thought, they in Holland, that maybe they use sacra as a salt because it's just salty plant. But we don't have this in our inland sites, also not in Steinhof. That's where we perhaps could, but no, we don't.
One more question, Calvin.
Did you try cooking perch with chives, and what was it like?
Chives, thank you. Yes.
Actually, I did not. No, in our experiments we did cook fish. We had that. I have to say that we
the dishes van Gelderse roos. Gelderse roos. So we cook this dish because also a lot of fantasy. We know that berries are used, well, actually in hunter-gatherers cooking pots. So we used this one, but we did not cook chives with fish. Yeah, we did not. We will do that. We will do that. It's a good fish soup. Good fish soup. Now we have Masamuda and such a beautiful setup. Everything is, we can just go there in spring and collect the wild chives and cook fish. We do that. We do that. We do that. I'll tell you later.
You can leave it on. You can leave it on there. Great. Okay. Thank you. We couldn't work out how to set that one up, Annelou. Eric was trying, but this one. I'll just attach this to you. And you have it on the computer, right? Because I don't have it on my USB.
Oh, oké, I think so. Ja. Die erbij. Oh, die andere niet. Oké. Wacht even, deze moet nu even weg. Waarom doet hij het nou niet? Techniques. We're not made for that, I think. Where did you? My things were on documents.
Click the plus, because then it'll open it in a new one, and then I won't.
Yeah, but I will
yeah,
do
but
it.
if you just do it there, because then you can do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Just then, because I know where my stuff is.
Okay. Okay.
Everything on you, didn't I? Yes, good.
Okay. Waarom krijg ik nou niet die voorstelling? Ja, oké. Okay. Yeah, you saw already quite a bit in the film, so I recognized that. Thought maybe my introductory slides I can go through quite quickly. But one thing I want to say is that all of these papers are joint ventures. So there are a lot of people who partook in them. So that's also why we sometimes read the papers, because they've been written by one of the team members. So it is, you have to apologize for that. And the other thing I want to say is that both in York, with Oliver Craig, and here in Leiden, there are several students who joined the project. And so, which was really nice. And in this paper, one of our students, Aaron Westra, will switch. I will switch to him to present some of the paper. But also in York, there were quite a few. You didn't mention the names, but there was a list of people, many of which were students. Here in Leiden, it was not only Aaron, but also Jiska de Bruin. I don't know whether she's here. There she is. She worked with the pottery and photography with Dennis. Markella Petroginaki, who is not here, but I think she's online. She did quite a lot of experiments with hide working. So I hope I'm not forgetting important people, am I? Well, anyway, so it's also very much a student thing, and which was really nice. So now we're going to move to toolkits and useware, which was the other major thing we did with the only full-time employer of this project, which is Lasse van den Dickenberg. And he has done all the flint work, so, but I will present his part of the paper because he has a paper this afternoon. So it's all very much joint ventures. Well, I think you already heard what useware analysis is. Yeah, we see use retouch. This is on flint, these pictures. You see use retouch, you see polish, you see striations and rounding. And it's the combination of all these features that we really can observe, they're real, that leads us to interpret the function. So it is, yeah, and it's actually one of the very, if not the only methods at the absence of organic materials with which we can infer indirectly the use and the working of organic materials like hide, horn nowadays as well. And that relies, of course, very much on experiments. So it is what we do a lot of experiments, and we observe the traces on these experimental tools, and we compare them visually with the traces, with this combination of traces, the distribution, the usage, the whole gamut of traces that are possible with those on archaeological tools. And this works not only for flint, but it also works for bone and antler, for stone, for pottery to some extent, for metal, well, and shell. So it's a lot of fun because we have to do a lot of experiments, but it's also a lot of work. So here you see these analogies. So I cannot stress, it's one of my, stokpaardjes, whatever that's in English, but to really stress that we identify really the presence of traces, but we interpret them. Like actually all archaeology is interpretation. So we're not different, but sometimes people think that way. And also the role of ethnography in ethnohistory is really important to give us new ideas. So it's not also how to carry out experiments. So that's a bit what we do. And somehow I got involved with a lot of different materials. That was because some were hardly ever looked at or overlooked a bit in the past. And with Hardingsveld, just about everything that was worked ended up on my desk. So I started to get interested in the relationships, both in how tools were made, but also how they were used between all these different materials. And yeah, we started to call it toolkits, but it is really this entire network of how each tool is part of a larger technological system. So, and I think it becomes really interesting that way, because you're not only looking at pottery or not only at flint, but you can involve all of these materials. Okay, this is, I'm now going to read a paper by Lasse, and so I'm going to read a little bit. Well, the flint material he did the past 5 years. He studied a lot of flint material from Den Haag, Steinhof 448, from Hekelingen 339, from Arie Kopla and Trench 15 253, from Vlaardingen Trench 1769, and from Zandwerve, a site where we're not going to talk too much about. It was selected because it's lying very close to the sites up in North Holland, which were involved with the North Holland's treasure chest project, where Lucy and I were both involved in, and it was always designated as so-called Vlaardingen. So we were interested how Vlaardingen that was and how this related. So, but we will not refer much to it today at all. So that's the maps. Okay, this is the network graphs. Lasse's thesis has a lot of these wonderful graphs, and with the very thick bars is the indication of that there's a lot of it. So there's a lot of hide working, the link between Steinhof and hide in that at Steinhof, and there's also a lot at Zandwerve, but there it concerns very little. So quantitatively, it's not. It looks significant here. It may be, but it's a very small sample. So let me see. Okay. So at Den Haag, we observe a clear focus on hide processing, and despite being interpreted as a permanent settlement with a subsistence strategy focused on domesticates, the flint tools did not reveal evidence for local cereal harvesting, at least the flint tools, despite the fact that emmer and barley were found. However, this does not mean that the cereals were not harvested. There was a really interesting thesis by another student who was involved to some extent in the project, Marc-Philippe Hach, who did an extensive experimental program with sickles of organic materials. So sickles with inserts of shell, and they work really, really well. So that's, he almost won the Luf Scriptieprijs. He was second, so it's a very good thesis. And it's also very important to realize that the absence of flint sickles doesn't mean that they have not harvested cereals. So it's, okay, next slide. Okay, cereal harvesting on the flint was very much present, it was present at Vlaardingen Arie Koplaan. And here you see some of these flakes with the polish from cereal harvesting. This came as a bit of a surprise because levees were generally seen as maybe not permanent settlements, and we generally associate cereal growing with permanent settlement. That's something that we can discuss this afternoon. It's the character of these sites is very much an issue, and there are still different ways of interpreting the data. Bone working, on the contrast, was not so much at all present at Den Haag Steinhof, but was very much present on especially Hekelingen, but also Vlaardingen. In the latter two sites, it concerns carving and sawing traces that could be related to the metapodium technique, which you see displayed here in the left-hand corner, a characteristic very much related to making awls and chisels from these bones, usually of red bone, because they're very nice and straight, and it gives very distinctive waste material, like that little distal end there that you see being cut off at that little scheme. You will see another one of that later today, later in this talk actually. And so even though at Den Haag, I should read this because it's not my story. At Den Haag Steinhof and Zandwerven, bone material was poorly preserved, and it was not clear whether the absence of production waste from the metapodium technique, like you see, like I just showed you, was related to an absence of the use of this technique or to poor preservation instead. However, user analysis has now shown that this technique was definitely not practiced here, as tools with the characteristic traces from carver or sawing bone, which are very difficult to miss, are lacking. So there's certainly a difference. For the use of the metapodium technique, the Delta communities preferred red deer bones. At Zandwerven and Steinhof, bone tool production seems to be limited to ad hoc tools. If red deer bones were not present or scarce, the metapodium technique was apparently not practiced. It should be noted, however, that the metapodia from especially red and roe deer are very suitable for this technique because they are perfectly straight, very strong lengthwise, and the bones of other animals are less so. The most striking outcome of the analysis of the flint from Steinhof is the abundance, and really abundance, of hide working tools at the site. More than 65% of the used edges display traces from working hide. Such a clear focus on one specific activity is something you would expect on temporary extraction camps focused on the exploitation of a specific resource. In the case of Steinhof, it obviously concerns a permanent settlement. So, how to explain such a strong focus on one activity? It can be suggested that the inhabitants produced more hides or hide-related products than they needed. There was ample space for cattle to graze around the settlement. To graze around the settlement. But good quality local flint was rare on the coastal barriers. Could this overproduction have been used to exchange for the high quality import flint that they needed? Flint from Belgium and Limburg was found at the site, and you will hear more about that from Lasse this afternoon. We can thus see the emergence of part-time craft specialization, in which the inhabitants of Steinhof began to specialize in certain crafts, with the overproduction intended for exchange. Although this is most clear for Steinhof, with the focus on hide working, it may also be applicable to the bone tools produced in quite a large quantity at the sites of Hekelingen 3 and Vlaardingen with the metapodium technique. So maybe there something similar is going on. So the conclusions based on flint is there's little evidence for diversity of activities at the dunes. The diversity in activity patterns is more prominent at the levee sites. And maybe this is somewhat unexpected, but it's what we see. And I think there are also explanations for that, but we can discuss that. Metapodium technique seems to be related to deer hunting. Serial harvesting is well attested for on the levees, especially at Vlaardingen, which came as a bit as a surprise. And at Den Haag Steinhof, part-time specialization we see and hard working for exchange. So now it's Aaron to take over all these things. The other one.
Ja, ik heb hem meegehaald. Prima. So let's see. Yes, so all the stone tool material analyzed was very fragmentary in nature, and the only complete tools larger than a bit of a pebble size were found at Zandwerve, which were polishing stones. When looking at the table on the top right, it becomes clear that serial processing was an important function of the ground stone tools at these sites. The table displays the number of actually used areas, which are, like the name suggests, the zones on the stone that have been used, which are the top, bottom, and sides. So if you look at it like a cube, you have 6 sides. At many of these sites, the stones would have been used for a very long time. Bottom current polish is present at 3 of the sites and are only missing at Hekelingen. Bottom current polish forms when the current, so the bottom stone for the serial processing, moves slightly over the materials such as leather that it rests upon, as well as the crushed cereal grains that have fallen off. This, in combination with the intense use of the currents, such as at Vlaardingen Arie Koplaan, seen in the picture on the left, can argue for an important part of cereals in subsistence at these sites, as the percentages of cereal milling actually used areas show as well in the third slide. So besides cereal processing, other activities occurred as well, of course, craft activities. These can be seen in the grinding of bone, flint, and processing hide. Working of bone occurred to some extent at every site except Zandwerve, and this makes sense as the only bone tool found at Zandwerve was not made with the metapodium technique, which has been seen, as previously mentioned, at Vlaardingen and Hekelingen. The function of the stone tool in this process would be grinding the bone tools, such as an awl or the needle, to a point. Flint polish is scarce, but still present at 3 of the sites. This aligns well with the evidence of import of ground flint axes rather than local production, where the whetstone, such an example is on the bottom right. It would have been used in resharpening or repairing the axe if it was chipped. The presence of hide working traces is slightly out of the ordinary, as in the archaeology of the Netherlands, not many hide working traces on groundstone have been found from other periods. They are present but very scarce. Nevertheless, even if present and well developed, especially at Steinhof, there does seem to be quite a lack of a polish there, where the majority of flint tools was used for the hide scraping, but there's very little hide working going on with the groundstone, so we can see a good example of variation between tool use, where groundstone was not really considered a good tool to assist in processing hides in this case. And lastly, there's the category of plant. You can see that's the big bar on the right, which is the broadest category, and unfortunately, usually the interpretation cannot come any closer to species level other than grainy, greasy, or dry plant polish. Sometimes you can get close to hazelnuts, as on the very right, or wood, but it is quite difficult to find. But it may have been very well possible that much of the plant material was processed for subsistence goals. And then lastly, you have the implications of habitation and subsistence at the sites. Well, I have 4 conclusions. Differences between the sites are not that large, especially with cereal, and Zandwerve is an outlier, but due to preservation issues, it's very hard to guarantee that the results are very accurate. More cereal polish was found than expected from a levee site at Hekelingen 3, but especially at Vlaardingen. Although local cultivation of cereal is a bit of a subject of debate, cereal was a significant factor in the use life of these stone tools, especially when considering the degree of wear and presence of bottom current polish. Thirdly, the largest range of craft activities is found at Hekelingen, with Steinhof as a close second. The landscape of these sites are very different, yet the activities are not that different as one might expect with the large differences within the landscape. And lastly, there is a very frequent use and reuse of all the sites of the stones, and combined with high fragmentation rates, it emphasizes that stones were not local and it would have taken quite some effort to obtain the stones, so they would have been used to the point of exhaustion. And with that, I would like to pass the mic back to Annelou.
And for the next part, which has also been written by Cynthia Komataruno, we decided not to change again because it takes time to change these microphones and all that. So I am reading this also on behalf of Cynthia, who looked at the Vlaardingen Arie Koppijnlaan, looked at 45 tools from bone and antler, and she also helped with Hekelingen, but I think, yeah, I had to do that in a month. So that was really a quick action, and to get all that confusing bone tools. We'll hear more about the confusing parts of bone tools in a minute. Okay, so the first slide. You see very big differences between Hekelingen and Vlaardingen. In Hekelingen, there's an extensive use of the awls and of the tools for plant working, whereas height working is very limited. And because we both looked at these tools, we are pretty sure that we are looking at the same thing, that we're confident that it's real, at least from what we saw. Whereas at Vlaardingen, there is more height working. And I think that's maybe a relevant, in my idea, it's a relevant observation from how to interpret maybe these sites. So, and then there is some bark working, some woodworking also at Hekelingen. And to the right, you see some of these traces. The traces were sometimes very, very confusing, and you'll hear more about it in the paper after the coffee, because we also think that there was a lot of intentional polishing on plants of these tools. And the one to the left, the picture to the left-hand corner has that, and all these little pinpricks are indications of handling. So we can often see where there is an extensive handling of these tools. And to the right is a little chisel from Vlaardingen with woodworking traces. So you see it's both processing of plants, some height working and some woodworking. Well, as to the toolkit, to the left-hand corner in the top, you see a small awl of bone, which displays traces from working with grass. And it's also completely polished with equisatum. And it's made of the beta podium technique, which is displayed in the bottom. And the flint tools from Hekelingen that had these kind of traces of carving and cutting bone, which you need to do this, to perform this technique and to make these awls, were also present. And last, Aaron and Annemiek found this interesting grinding tone tool from Hekelingen, also with traces from grinding and resharpening these bone tools. And the interesting thing about this is that it's severely shortened. This is a tool that has been used a long, long time and has been reground and reground and reground, and it became shorter and shorter and shorter. And it's something that, for example, traditional beehive makers, they use a bone that is like 15, 20 centimeters long, and slowly it gets reduced to only a few centimeters. So bone is really soft actually, and wears down very quickly. But we do see on quite a number from Hekelingen, we see a polish that looks very much like grass, and as if there's lots of little scratches. And so I interpreted that as being from coiled basketry. And that's the visualization that Kelvin made here to the right, a woman working on an awl with coiled basketry, and in the back of it, there's another person who is grinding, who's polishing a piece of bone on crumbled equisatum. So that's a toolkit. And then what came as a real surprise when I was looking through the big box of Hekelingen objects, where there was a considerable number of these metapodia ends, there were two with very strange traces who really looked different. They had wear traces. They were clearly worn, and well, I think if the location of the wear traces, I think it was an ornament, and this ornament was probably a centerpiece of a as is displayed here in this visualization by Kelvin. At the bottom you see this metapodium. And I think it is really interesting that it is a red deer metapodium because, for example, in the Doggerland project, red deer occurs again and again. It is an animal that has played a very important role also in the life, but also in the cosmology of late Mesolithic people in the whole North Sea basin. So this seems to be, in a way, a continuation. So it's not just a waste product that we don't have to look at and that's indicative of a special technique, but apparently it has significance. It has a special significance for these people in order to make an ornament that's really quite heavily worn. So I think it tells us a little bit about their mindset, about other things than just function and tools and making things. Okay, the conclusions based on the bone and antler and teeth. We have a few more perforated teeth from Hekelingen as well, so there's more teeth than one that we looked at. Well, Hekelingen 3 is predominantly plant processing, versus in Vlaardingen it's a little bit more hide working, but you have to bear in mind that the amounts of material that we looked at that had traces is very small. There's a wider range of craft activities in Hekelingen. Again, that is also due to the sample, I think. I cannot imagine that would have been different in Vlaardingen if we had seen more tools, because one problem we are struggling with is that, especially for Vlaardingen, but we fear it's also applicable to Hekelingen, there's a lot of material we didn't see. And in Maarleveld there is a huge amount of metapodium tools and awls and chisels displayed that we have not been able, and Erik and I looked through all the boxes in the Vlaardingen depot and they are not there. So we have seen probably a very small amount, and which is every time you look at very old material, this is really a problem, that some of the best pieces, we had it also in the North Holland Treasure Chest project, that's, the key pieces sometimes are missing because they're wherever, in all sorts of, I see you nodding, it's really a problem. Okay, so that's the wider range, and then the complex biographies. So in the next paper, some of these complex, after coffee, some of these complex biographies of bone and antler will be presented. And I already stressed the special significance of red deer. And what is really interesting is indeed the interconnectedness, again, of all these materials. Did I have another? Yeah. So with respect to the plant working tools, they're made by the metapodium techniques, they're resharpened, they're polished, but you have this interconnectivity also in other ways. And from Steinhoff, there is this, to the bottom right picture, there is this tiny little borer that was used to drill pottery, and they are repair holes, and I think Jeroen knows about this. What happened is that these axes that they use, and the axes are essential, flint and stone axes, they break. They get an end shock, they break, and they get stuck in their antler shafts, or their wooden shafts, but the other half is a perfect core to create, to recycle into a lot of different flakes. That will also be discussed in the next paper a bit. So these flakes can be turned into little awls. The awls can be made to drill these perforations through which, and that's the top right-hand corner, the bark, or in any case the plant fibers, are wound to bind the shirt, the broken off shirt, back into place. And you see at the bottom of the visualization, you see such a pot with the bindings. And in the top you see the bindings, the bark bindings hanging over. So here you see all these different materials that are connected basically in a way that if you only look at one thing, you don't really get the full picture. And this is, again, only a little part of such a larger system of relationships. So thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, then feel free to ask. Oh, you want this?
Yeah, just so that people can hear the question.
So if I understand correctly, and I combine the last two papers, it seems that they were mostly cooking fish and working hide. So where did the meat go?
It's okay, no, I'll hold it. You can stand.
Okay. Well, the meat is as you know, on stone tools and on flint tools is very difficult to see. So that's one thing that will be severely underrepresented if it even develops. And so that is, unless maybe pemmican had dried meat, I think you have pretty clear traces of that, isn't it? Also not so. Okay. So that's Annemieke. I asked Annemieke. So that's one of the problems. Yeah, about the cooking, that's more a question for Lucy, why there's no meat.
Actually, there is meat. In Steinhoff, there's plenty of meat. The cereals actually were cooked with meat. So Steinhoff, yes, and very few in Heckelingen, but none in Vlaardingen. So the meat was in the pot.
But not everywhere. That's interesting, because maybe they had just a surplus of cows, and which they eat, and they process the skins for they're gorged. So I think it is actually it makes it fits, I think.
Short question?
It's not a question. It was at Steinhoff. I may have found some traces of working meat, but it was inconclusive. So it's very much soft animal material. So it fell under the other category in analysis, like a lot of industrial newswear.
All right, coffee and tea time.